Hello everybody, today is Tuesday, September 15th. This is going to be our official 50-day Senate election prediction, okay? This is it. This is the big push, okay? There isn't that much time to go, and all signs point to this being a very, very contested Senate battle. We do know how I would say most of these races on this map are going to turn out, but as we always do, we're going to have to go through each of them and dissect how this is going to end up. So remember, as we all know, right now on this map, the current ones that are already elected there are 65 of those. The Democrats represent 35 of those seats. The Republicans represent 30. Whereas, as we know, though, the Republicans in the overall actual majority have the majority right now, 53 to 47, and the Democrats are going to have to flip, as a result, a minimum of a net 3 seats to have a chance at controlling the Senate. If they do not flip the presidency, they will need a minimum of 4 flips to go their way. So let's go through it. We're going to break down all 35 races for you, starting from west to east, as we always do, and we begin in the state of Alaska, where continues to be kind of an underrated race, just in terms of the competitive nature of it, and just trying to figure out exactly where this race stands. Is it really competitive? Is it not? It's hard to know. But the very fact that I'm saying it is hard to know makes it competitive, because Alaska is one of those states that can just kind of bounce, either way. The Democrats have been able to get representatives elected here. They, of course, had Mark Begich elected here. Mark Begich was the only Democratic governor, or I guess was at the site of the only Democratic gubernatorial loss in the 2018 midterms. Remember, they flipped 7 governor's seats, whereas the Republicans were able to flip 1, and that was out here in Alaska. Right now, Dan Sullivan, who's not really popular, as an incumbent, but is not necessarily unpopular either. He's just fairly unknown, generally by his own constituents and then some. He also had a bit of a gaffe recently when, after the passing of John Lewis, he tried to post a tribute photo of him with John Lewis, but just as Marco Rubio did, he posted a picture of himself with Elijah Cummings instead of John Lewis. Now, that doesn't really appear to have, hurt him in the polls. And personally, it's up to the voters, but personally, that's not really something I think should, weigh too much on voters' minds. It could have happened to all of us. But so far, the data doesn't really show that that is affecting that. However, one recent poll, the most recent poll that came out in the state of Alaska, had Al Gross statistically tied with Dan Sullivan. So while that's not necessarily a trend that we're seeing develop, it is the first one that shows Dan Sullivan in some trouble against Al Gross. And as we know, this is just a state where it could just bounce either way. We don't really know. And of course, Al Gross is running as an independent. And as we know, independents have far more success than the Democratic Party does, because if you're a Republican, you can get elected here. If you're just an overall Democrat, it's a lot more difficult, whereas independents typically have an easier time. Remember, let's not forget, this is a state where Lisa Murkowski lost in the Republican primary for election, and then promised to she was just going to turn over as an independent, and she ran and she won. So right now, I'm going to label this lean Republican, just because of that recent poll as opposed to likely. But right now, I still think Dan Sullivan has the upper hand just because of the nature of this state. But keep an eye on it. We don't always know. Jeff Merkley is going to be just fine in the state of Oregon. Remember, as we know, the Republicans have had a senator here, elected within the last 20 years, but they're not going to get it done this time. Paulette Jordan in the state of Idaho is somebody that has generated a lot of buzz and a lot of pride within the Democratic Party. She has run for office before in this state. She is someone that the Democrats would like to see built up enough to potentially run, maybe, or not even necessarily run, but maybe get picked for some sort of cabinet position or something like that. She is definitely someone the Democratic Party is excited about, even though she has no chance of defeating Jim Risch in the Senate here in Idaho. Now, in Arizona, obviously, this is one of the big pickup opportunities for the Democratic Party. Only within 4 years, this state has really shown consistent signs of shifting from right to left. In 2016, Donald Trump won with a plurality of the vote here. Okay, so that pretty clearly shows that even he is not that popular in what has traditionally been a pretty reliable Republican state, a state that has not voted Democratic on the presidential levels in decades. But since then, not only did Hillary Clinton come surprisingly close in this state, but there are now more Democrats in the United States House of Representatives from the state of Arizona than there are Republicans. That is very notable, if you ask me. And of course, as we know, the Democrats did pick up a Senate seat here in 2018 when Martha McSally was defeated by Kyrsten Sinema, the Democrat. Martha McSally, though, is since running again for the other Senate seat. This one is the one that was represented by John McCain for many years in the Senate. And so the mere fact that John McCain's old seat, you wouldn't really expect voters to think about that too much. After all, it is just an empty chair. But maybe there was some sort of sentimentality at play here. That doesn't appear to be happening. Mark Kelly, the former astronaut, the veteran, the husband of Gabrielle Giffords, is thoroughly defeating Martha McSally in the polls. This doesn't even look like that competitive a race so far. And there's not that long to go. I'd say so far there's not that much left. You know, we're kind of at the tail end of campaign season now with less than 50 days to go. With that said, I do think Martha McSally will get over 45%, and I think this is not going to be a thing where Mark Kelly wins with 15%. That's not going to happen. I know Mark Kelly has consistently led, oftentimes by double digits. Some of the polls that he's struggled in only have him down, or rather only up by 5-6 points. And when that's a bad day for you, that shows you're in a pretty good position. And the most recent Fox News poll, a very, very well-respected pollster, had Mark Kelly up by 17 points on Martha McSally. So I'm going to label this likely Democrat, even though the final margin will probably, in my estimation, come out to a lean. Now, in Montana, this is another very interesting Senate race that, unfortunately for the Democratic Party, is not showing too many promising signs. This was one of those races that the Democrats were extremely bullish on when Steve Bullock, beg your pardon, the current governor of the state of Montana, announced with only minutes to spare his candidacy for this Senate seat. The first couple of polls that came out had him in a good position. Okay, the very first one we saw was conducted by Public Policy Polling back in March that had him tied with Steve Daines, the incumbent, and then a Montana State University, Bozeman University of Denver poll that was released in May had Bullock leading by 7 points. Okay, and then another one, a University of Montana poll that got released in July that had him up by 4 points. Since then, another one that had him up by 2, so that's a consistent narrowing. Then Steve Daines by 2, Steve Daines by 3, Steve Daines by 6, Steve Daines by 3. So clearly, the momentum is with Steve Daines. And the other races, there's a whole lot going on in the state. You got a Senate race, a House race, a governor race, and a presidential race. All of them currently are being led by the Republicans. However, the House race between Kathleen Williams and Matt Rosendale, we've seen both of those names before running for office. Kathleen Williams did win the most recent poll by 3 percentage points. So maybe there's a turning of the tide coming, because we can also coincide that with Mike Cooney, the lieutenant governor of Montana, who, of course, is part of the Steve Bullock administration. He is running for governor. Remember, there hasn't been a Republican governor in the state of Montana since 2000. He came within 1 point in the most recent poll of Greg Gianforte, who currently is the House member in the state of Montana. So you sort of have all these moving parts where current office holders are running for other offices. Obviously, on the presidential level, that is going to easily go Donald Trump's way. But right now, I still think Steve Bullock has a chance in this state. He is revered. He is beloved in this state. Remember, this is one that he was the only governor, the only Democratic governor that was able to win re-election. That's the key word, re-election, on the same night that Donald Trump won election in that same state. Okay, Donald Trump won this state by over 20 points in 2016, and Steve Bullock also won, and won rather comfortably. Okay, but just because of the polling, though, I'm still only going to label this tilt Republican. I think if the election were tonight, I would have Steve Daines winning, with Steve Bullock getting around 48% of the vote. Wyoming is not even a discussion, as we all know. It's kind of a running joke at this point on the channel. Now in Colorado, this is obviously one of the other big pickup opportunities for the Democrats, and they are so far easily taking advantage of it. Cory Gardner, I think the writing was on the wall for Cory Gardner as early as 2014, to be entirely honest. This is a state that has consistently moved further and further to the left for the Democratic Party. They were able to replace John Hickenlooper, a very, very well-respected and well-liked governor by both sides. He was able to, he decided to run for president, and the Democrats swiftly replaced him with another Democrat, that being Jared Polis, an openly gay governor as well. So clearly they're not really having any problems. On that level, Michael Bennet is up for another guy who ran for president. He is also up for re-election in 2 years. He is not going to have any trouble winning that race as well. They've had a lot of gains in the state legislature here as well. And since then, the Democrats have, for this Senate seat, that, look, Cory Gardner was going to face a tough challenge, and I think was going to be the underdog basically no matter who it was. You could have a very obscure, low fundraising Democrat, center, far left even Democrat, whoever you want to name it. I still think he'd be the underdog. Further complicating things for Cory Gardner is that the candidate that the Democrats fielded was probably the single best candidate they could have fielded for this race, and that is John Hickenlooper himself. Polling consistently has Hickenlooper ahead of Gardner, some by a little less than others, but the most recent one had him up by 10 points. I'm going to label this likely. Again, we can't always really label, a certain state safe if he's not the incumbent, but right now, that's going to go the Democratic Party's way. New Mexico, this is an open Senate seat, but I think Ben Ray Lujan so far is showing no signs of trouble in this state. Always a state that again, some of the evaluators have this listed as a swing state. I believe 270, 538. They list this as a swing state, but right now the Democrats really shouldn't be too worried about this. The South Dakota Democratic Party is known and revered nationally for their success. This is one of the most successful state parties for either party in the country. The only thing is Mike Rounds is not going to really be facing any kind of stiff challenge this time. Remember, the Democrats and, Kristi Noem, the current Republican governor of the state, got with 47% of the vote going to her opponent. I believe his name was Bill Sutton, was the name of the Democratic candidate for that seat. So the Democrats have have had success in the state in the past. Tim Johnson up here in South Dakota, don't forget about that. Nebraska is very different, though. This is a pretty safe Republican stronghold. Now, in Kansas, okay, this has been something that I think has been a little disappointing for the GOP, and that is because what we've seen over and over again in this state is that the Republicans keep thinking they kind of have this seat in the bag. Then Chris Kobach, who, of course, lost a couple of years ago in that governorship race to Laura Kelly, he then threw his hat in the ring in the primary, which kind of complicated some of the fundraising going on. Now, thankfully for the GOP, Roger Marshall, the representative, defeated him rather soundly, by a bigger margin than people even expected, and some even expected. In fact, I'll confess even I did, that Chris Kobach was going to defeat Roger Marshall. But so far, that doesn't appear to be paying too many dividends for the GOP. The recent polling has Roger Marshall up by 1 point on Barbara Bollier, the one that was released on August 7th, and another one has him just by 2 on August 12th. So, and Bollier's even won a poll going back to one that was held between the end of May and the beginning of June. So, Barbara Bollier is alive and well in this race. I do think it's going to ultimately end up going to Roger Marshall, because I don't think the Democrats have put too much attention into this one and too many funds into this race. So overall, I'm going to label this likely, but it could end up being lean or even as close as tilt. Oklahoma, Jim Inhofe is in no trouble of losing this race. Now, in the state of Texas, the presidential race is much closer than the Senate race here. Now, of course, 2 years ago, Beto O'Rourke came pretty close, got over 48% of the vote, 48.3 to be exact, against Ted Cruz. Now, you could say that's obviously a sign of things to come, a bit of a harbinger for the Democrats. However, if you're the Republicans, you might honestly take that as a great sign. You had a very unpopular incumbent Republican senator who still was able to defeat a extremely enthusiastic young candidate who later ran for president in a Democratic wave here, and that still went the Republican Party's way. NJ Hager, who unsuccessfully ran for Congress 2 years ago, is challenging John Cornyn. So far, she's hanging in there, but it doesn't look like she's going to be able to pull this one out. I have John Cornyn winning this, so I'm going to label this likely. Now, in Minnesota, Tina Smith obviously isn't as established and well-known and loved as Amy Klobuchar is in the state. Amy Klobuchar in 2018 won re-election and won with a lot of these traditionally Republican counties also voting for her. Tina Smith doesn't have that same luxury, but Tina Smith was able to win election replacing the resigned Senator Al Franken, and I expect that she's not going to have too much trouble this time around either. I think Tina Smith, is riding some of that momentum that we saw in the state when the Democrats won all three statewide races, in 2018 in the midterms. Tina Smith, Amy Klobuchar won both of the Senate races, and Tim Walz won the governor's race here as well. So the Democrats clearly have a ton of momentum here, and obviously anything that they were concerned about also on the presidential race right here in the Minneapolis area has quelled that. Everything we've seen from the George Floyd murder and since then the subsequent protests had this clearly leaning the Democratic Party's way. I'm not going to label it safe just because she's not nearly as established as Amy Klobuchar, but I'm going to label it likely for the Democrats. Now, in Iowa, another seat the Democrats are very bullish on. It hasn't really panned out entirely for them, and that is because I think that Joni Ernst has sort of gotten it together. She's become a little more public in recent weeks, trying to fight back against Teresa Greenfield. Because look, Teresa Greenfield was leading, and leading pretty consistently. I mean, you go all the way back to June. You had Greenfield +2, Greenfield +3, Greenfield +3, Greenfield +2, and then Joni Ernst +3, +1, +1. Then Greenfield recovered a little bit, had one +4, another +2, and then another +3 from public policy polling. But the most recent one from Fabrizio Ward Hart Research Associates that was released on September 10th had Joni Ernst leading Teresa Greenfield by 5 points. So that's the biggest spread that we've had basically since Teresa Greenfield won this Democratic primary. Okay, so there was a time when I had this labeled as tilt Democrat. I can't do that anymore. I think it's going to be tilt Republican because I think this is a state that just has a little bit of an identity at the end of the day. It's shifted very far to the right since going to Barack Obama both times. Of course, the Democrats had a lot of substantial gains in the House. A lot of money's been poured into this race. I do think Teresa Greenfield will get around 48, maybe 49%, and don't be surprised in the slightest if she ends up winning this race altogether. But I do think, as of now, the Republicans have the edge here. Arkansas, there's not even a Democratic candidate. Louisiana, the Democrats only fielded their candidate several weeks ago. Now, in Mississippi, Mike Espy is giving it another shot against Cindy Hyde-Smith. I don't really think there's going to be a different result this time. Now, turnout in this state is going to be high. As we know, this is the biggest minority population state in the United States, kind of part of what is the Old South right up here where my mouse is going. As we know, the Democrats do a little better in this state than they do in Alabama. They're usually able to get consistently above 40%, whereas in Alabama, they don't always do, only sometimes. And of course, Mike Espy did get 46% of the vote. That was something people lost sight of a little bit because Cindy Hyde-Smith was in some hot water with some racially charged comments she had made. However, there's not really any reason to believe Mike Espy is going to be able to turn the tide by enough of a margin this time. I'm going to label this likely Republican just because I don't really see Cindy Hyde-Smith losing this race. Alabama, let's face facts, guys. It's a safe state. I know Tommy Tuberville is not the incumbent here, but it took probably the single worst candidate the Republican Party could have ever fielded for that Senate seat. And, you know, in that special election that Doug Jones won, and Doug Jones still only barely won that race. Tommy Tuberville, who is not exactly a robust candidate himself, he's never held elected office, anything like that. He is walloping Doug Jones by double digits regularly. I don't see any reason that this goes the Democratic Party's way. Now, there are two races, as we know, here in Georgia. The special election, I think, is going to be safe Republican because I think it's very likely that both that when the two candidates that advanced to the runoff in January, I think it's very, very likely that both of them will be Republicans. But we will discuss the main race here, the normal general race. That's because Jon Ossoff is making David Perdue sweat this one, and really considerably. Okay, throughout the election season, David Perdue had been leading Jon Ossoff 2 points, 3 points, and then maybe a poll here or there, Jon Ossoff pulls ahead. Most recent one had, Jon Ossoff leading by 1 point. However, there was one that got released just today by Harris X. Now, I will say that's not exactly a respected pollster. It's a little outdated. It was held from the 20th to the 30th of August, but it did have Jon Ossoff down 7 points to David Perdue. So that is kind of a sigh of relief for the GOP. That pretty much, I'm not going to say it closes the deal, but it really does make you think that this is not going to go the Democratic Party's way. After all, Jon Ossoff is a guy that, obviously the fundraising has been outstanding for him, but at the end of the day, given that poll result, if the momentum had kept up from what we had seen earlier, I would say otherwise, but I still think I'm only going to label it tilt because we had that recent poll from only a few days back that had Ossoff leading, so this could just be a one-off poll that captured a lot of Republicans in the rural areas, but we don't know. In Tennessee, this is going to be safe GOP. I mean, long since the days of Al Gore and Phil Bredesen, this is pretty easily going to be a Republican state. South Carolina, we have mentioned here how I think Jamie Harrison is doing a great job. He's doing everything he can. The fundraising totals have been unbelievable. He raised a record $13.9 million in the month of June. And we did see how those advertising blitzes that he was on were making a difference. And so we were wondering how over these last 2 months, with the remaining cash on hand, of which he has so much more than Lindsey Graham, continue to put, Lindsey Graham into some trouble and narrow up those polls further and further. We haven't seen any polling since then. Whoops, I don't know why this is popping up. Now you know where I go to school. But the reality of the situation is Lindsey Graham is still, probably is among the stronger incumbents in this entire field. I'm still gonna leave it lean as our last characterization had, but I still wouldn't read too much into that. We need to see consistent polling showing Jamie Harrison in real contention. Now, in North Carolina, it's the complete opposite. Similarly to Montana, there's a ton going on in this state. The presidential race is very close. Joe Biden and Donald Trump are neck and neck in the polling in that state as well. There are 2 House races down here along the border of South Carolina that are very, very hotly contested and could go either way. And the governorship election is happening here as well between Roy Cooper and Dan Forest. Roy Cooper is going to win re-election. He just is. He's extremely popular. Cal Cunningham challenging Thom Tillis, who of course defeated Kay Hagan. It looks like the Democrats are in pretty strong position to get that seat right back. Thom Tillis is in dire trouble. Cal Cunningham repeatedly leads him in the polls. I am, for the first time on this channel, changing this to a likely characterization. And there you go. There's 3 pickups for the Democrats. So the lowest possible number that they needed, they have hit. But of course, as we know, Alabama has flipped from blue to red, meaning they need another. So in Kentucky, and Amy McGrath was someone that Chuck Schumer personally recruited to challenge Mitch McConnell, but I don't see that affecting this race really at all, even though Amy McGrath had a ridiculous early fundraising totals. I kind of messed this up a little bit here. Illinois, Dick Durbin is in no real trouble of losing in this race. I know we did get one comment from someone who said that he thinks that Illinois is a state that could sort of surprisingly go red. Maybe, if the Republicans had just a great day, they could defeat Tammy Duckworth, but not Dick Durbin. Dick Durbin is extremely well-liked. Approvals are very high. He's part of the leadership. Dick Durbin is in no trouble of losing this race. I'm not even really sure Tammy Duckworth is, but Dick Durbin especially isn't. West Virginia, as we know, the Democrats, kind of similarly to Alaska, in a thoroughly Republican state, can get moderate Democrats elected, but not in this one. Shelley Moore Capito is going to be just fine. Mark Warner also is probably going to be just fine. Daniel Gade hasn't really been able to generate much enthusiasm or much fundraising. This, of course, only a short time ago was a state that the Republicans were very, very pleased with their abilities to get representatives and such elected here. But now the Democrats have full control of the state legislature and so on. So, this goes the Democratic Party's way, I think, through and through. In the state of Michigan, John James is giving it another shot, kind of similarly to Mike Espy. Only this time he's running against Gary Peters, the other senator. It doesn't look like he's going to be able to defeat him either. Okay, he came fairly close against Debbie Stabenow, about 5-ish points. But it doesn't look like he's going to be able to defeat Gary Peters either. This is a state that so far looks very, very solid for the Democrats. By the way, we also got another comment that I noticed on our presidential election prediction video that said, saying that the Trump campaign had not indeed pulled their ads out of the state. Now, I will say that is not correct. What has happened is the Trump campaign has indeed pulled their ads out of the state. The ads that you're still seeing on TV that this commenter pulled out, again, I can't list you by name, but the commenter that did say that they pulled their ads out of the state, or excuse me, that they do still see the ads. That is because those are just ads that were booked very recently, and so there's still some sort of contractual obligation to have them air. So they have pulled their future ads that you just haven't seen yet out of the state. Eventually, you will stop seeing ads at the state of Michigan, and that's not going to help John James. Okay, and any convention bump that he was expected to get has been dashed as well. So the Democrats retain that seat as well. Delaware, we know that's going to go their way. New Jersey, Cory Booker is going to be fine. Jack Reed is going to be fine in Rhode Island. And we finally know who the candidate is here for the Democrats, and it's Ed Markey. He and Joe Kennedy, neither of them would have any trouble winning this race either. And of course, the vice presidential nod I think we have to give to the Democrats, at least so far, because Joe Biden is still ahead in this presidential race. Sort of the last swingy-ish state here. Of course, both of these are very contested, but New Hampshire is really more considered a swing state, is between Jeanne Shaheen and Kelly Ayotte, the Republican. The Republicans, have chances in this state regularly. Of course, Chris Sununu is the Republican governor, very popular Republican governor, easily going to win re-election. As we know, he and Phil Scott, the governor of Vermont, they're both limited to 2-year terms. Jeanne Shaheen, this was a state that the Republicans kind of pointed to kind of throw a wrench into the Democratic Party's hopes of flipping the Senate altogether. Well, you know, they haven't really been able to field that. The only thing the Republicans really have to do to have a chance in the Senate is just to field a very notable candidate. They just couldn't do that this time. So Jeanne Shaheen, I think, is going to be safe. It could maybe end up with a likely margin, but I think Jeanne Shaheen is going to be just fine. Keep an eye on this state in 2 years, as I've mentioned before, as Maggie Hassan, who won her race by 0.1% 4 years ago, is up for re-election in 2 years. And should she be challenged by Chris Sununu, watch out. Now, in Maine, this is obviously the big one here. Susan Collins has, throughout the campaign season, been trailing Sarah Gideon, the Democratic Speaker of the Maine House of Representatives. She went from being the most popular senator in the country to the most unpopular senator in the country. That honor now belongs down here to Tom Cotton. Now, Susan Collins has been able to kind of hang in those polls a little bit. You know, she's only down by 4 points, 3 points, 5 points. You know, one from back in May, I believe, that had her down by 9 points. So she's down, no doubt, and I'd rather be Sarah Gideon than Susan Collins right now, although Susan Collins did just recently, within the last couple of days, get a big boost from Joe Lieberman, okay, who endorsed her. Joe Lieberman's always been a bit of a maverick. It's always a little unpredictable what he's going to do, but remember, this was shocking because Joe Lieberman's own son is running for the Senate down here in the special election in Georgia, and so that was shocking to see him endorse a Republican. Of course, look, many Democrats have endorsed Susan Collins in the past, including Angus King, who, of course, is an independent, but caucuses with the Democrats. Even he has endorsed Susan Collins within his own state for the GOP. However, right now, I still think I'm going to label this going the Democratic Party's way, but because of that endorsement and because the polls have been continuing to stay very close, I have that as a tilt Democrat. So the Democrats basically flipped the core four of Arizona, Colorado, North Carolina, and Maine. They weren't able to get flips in Montana and Iowa, or Georgia, and they weren't really able to get that long shot in South Carolina or Texas either. But there's your map, 50-50, a net flip of 3 seats for the Democrats, and of course the vice presidency going the Democratic Party's way. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please comment down the suggestions below. Hit that subscribe button if you have not already. We've gotten such great viewership over these last like 10 videos or so. I'm so grateful for that. Thank you so much, everybody. Comment down the suggestions below. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. As always, I will try to answer any questions or comments you may have to the best of my ability. Always correct me if I skip over something, as I always do. I'm not looking at any information here. I'm just staring at this map and going from there. It's all straight off the top, so I may very well have missed something. So thank you guys so much again for watching, and I'll see you in November.